The wreckage stretched as far as Alex could see across the frozen surface of Titan 7. Broken ships from dozens of alien species lay scattered like the bones of ancient beasts. Some had crashed during the war 50 years ago. Others had simply broken down and been abandoned when their crews could no longer afford repairs. Now they served as Alex's livelihood. He kicked a chunk of twisted metal out of his path and adjusted the heat pack on his chest. The temperature on this moon never rose above -40 degrees. Most species avoided places like this, but humans had learned long ago that the most dangerous places often held the greatest treasures. His scanner beeped as he approached a massive hull that had once been painted in the deep purples and golds of the Draknari Empire. The ship was old, probably from before the Great Disappearance when the dragon-like beings had simply vanished from known space. Alex had only seen pictures of the Draknari in history books. They had been tall, proud creatures with scales that shimmered like jewels and wings that could generate enough heat to melt steel. The scanner showed valuable metals deep inside the wreckage. Alex pulled out his cutting torch and began to work his way through the outer hull. The metal was different from anything he had worked with before. It seemed to sing as he cut through it, a low harmonic sound that made his teeth ache. Inside the ship, everything was sized for beings much larger than humans. The corridors were wide and tall, with curved walls that had once been decorated with intricate patterns. Now they were dark and cold, covered in a thin layer of frost. Alex's breath came out in white puffs as he made his way deeper into the vessel. His light beam swept across what had once been a cargo bay. Containers of various sizes were scattered across the floor, most of them cracked open by the impact of the crash. Alex began sorting through the contents, looking for anything that might be worth the trip. Most of the items were too damaged to be useful, but he found a few pieces of intact Draknari crystal technology that would fetch a good price. It was then that he heard the sound. At first, Alex thought it was just the wind whistling through a crack in the hull, but as he stood still and listened, he realized it was something else. A soft, weak crying that seemed to come from somewhere nearby. He followed the sound through a maze of fallen beams and twisted metal. In the corner of what had once been a luxury cabin, Alex found the source. A small creature no bigger than a house cat was curled up in a nest made from shredded fabric and insulation. Its scales were a dull red color that seemed to shift and flicker in his flashlight beam. Tiny wings were folded against its sides and its breathing was shallow and rapid. Alex knelt down slowly, not wanting to frighten the creature. As his light fell on it more clearly, he gasped in recognition. This was a Draknari hatchling, probably no more than a few weeks old. But that was impossible. The Draknari had been gone for centuries. How could there still be a live one here? The hatchling opened its eyes and looked at him. They were large and golden, filled with an intelligence that made Alex's heart skip a beat. This was not just any animal. This was a being as smart as he was, maybe smarter, and it was dying. Alex had learned enough about Draknari biology to know what was wrong. The hatchlings needed intense heat to survive their first months of life. In the wild, their parents would breathe fire on them regularly to keep their body temperature high enough for their organs to function properly. Without that heat, they would slowly freeze to death even in temperatures that other creatures found comfortable. He looked around the wrecked cabin and saw the remains of what had once been a heating unit. It had been designed to provide the kind of heat a Draknari hatchling would need, but it had been damaged in the crash and was no longer working. The hatchling had been slowly dying in this frozen tomb. Alone and afraid, Alex reached out carefully and touched the creature's head. Its scales were cold, much colder than they should have been. The hatchling made a soft chirping sound and tried to nuzzle against his gloved hand. It was looking for warmth, for any source of heat that might keep it alive a little longer. He made his decision quickly. Alex carefully scooped up the hatchling and tucked it inside his coat next to his body heat packs. The creature seemed to relax slightly as it absorbed the warmth, but Alex could tell it was not enough. The hatchling needed much more heat than his makeshift solution could provide. As he carried the creature back to his ship, Alex's mind was racing. He had heard stories about the Draknari homeworld, about the great volcanic forges where their young were raised in temperatures that would kill most other forms of life. But their homeworld was gone, destroyed in some ancient catastrophe. Where in the galaxy could he find heat intense enough to save this little one? Then he remembered something from his childhood on Earth. His grandfather had been a geologist who worked at the volcanic research stations in Antarctica. He had told Alex stories about the scientists who lived and worked in places where lava flowed like rivers, and the air itself could burn your lungs. Most aliens thought humans were crazy for building their facilities in such dangerous places. Alex smiled as he reached his ship and carefully placed the hatchling in his emergency medical bay. He cranked up the heat as high as it would go and watched as the creature's scales began to brighten slightly. It was not enough for long-term survival, but it would keep the hatchling alive during the journey he was about to make. He sat down at his navigation console and punched in coordinates for Earth. It would take 3 weeks to get there through hyperspace, and he would have to use most of his savings to pay for the fuel. But Alex had a feeling that this little creature was worth more than money. The Draknari had been the greatest engineers in galactic history. Their knowledge had been lost when they disappeared. If this hatchling could survive and grow, it might remember things that could change the galaxy. As his ship lifted off from Titan 7, Alex looked back at the wreckage one last time. Somewhere in that maze of broken metal and frozen dreams, he had found something precious, a link to the past and maybe a hope for the future. The hatchling chirped softly from the medical bay, and Alex felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the ship's heating system. The journey home was going to be interesting. Hyperspace was normally a peaceful place for Alex. The swirling colors outside his viewports and the gentle hum of the engines usually helped him relax during long journeys. But this trip was different. Every few hours he found himself rushing to the medical bay to check on his tiny passenger. The hatchling had survived the first week, but just barely. Alex had pushed his ship's heating systems to their absolute limits, and even then the creature spent most of its time curled up in a tight ball, trying to conserve what little body heat it had. Alex had started calling it Ember, partly because of its red scales and partly because it reminded him of the last dying coal in a fireplace. During his second week in hyperspace, Alex realized that his ship's standard heating system would not be enough. Ember was getting weaker each day, and the creature's scales were starting to turn gray at the edges. Alex knew he had to do something drastic, or he would arrive at Earth with nothing but a small corpse. He spent 3 days studying his ship's engineering manuals and making calculations. What he was planning had never been attempted before, and if he made a mistake, both he and Ember would die in a ball of superheated plasma. But the alternative was watching the hatchling slowly freeze to death. Alex began by shutting down all non-essential systems. Life support, navigation, and engines were all he kept running. Then he started rerouting power conduits through the medical bay. He took apart his ship's food processor and used its heating elements to create additional heat sources. The emergency beacon became part of his improvised heating system. Even his personal belongings went into the recycler to provide raw materials for his modifications. The most dangerous part was tapping directly into the ship's fusion reactor. Alex had to crawl through maintenance tunnels barely wide enough for his shoulders, working with tools while wearing a radiation suit that made his hands clumsy. One wrong move could cause a plasma leak that would turn his ship into a brief new star. But it worked. By the end of the second week, the medical bay was as hot as a blast furnace. Alex had to wear full environmental gear just to enter the room, and the heat was so intense that the air itself seemed to shimmer. But Ember loved it. The hatchling's scales regained their bright red color, and for the first time since Alex had found it, the creature seemed truly awake and alert. Alex spent hours each day in the medical bay, talking to Ember while he fine-tuned the heating system. The environmental suit was bulky and uncomfortable, but he discovered that the hatchling seemed to enjoy his company. Ember would chirp and whistle in response to Alex's voice, and sometimes it almost seemed like the creature was trying to communicate. On one particularly memorable day, Alex was explaining how fusion reactors worked when Ember suddenly stood up and began making a series of complex sounds. They were not random chirps or whistles, but organized patterns that reminded Alex of mathematical equations. The hatchling seemed frustrated when Alex did not understand, and it began using its tiny claws to scratch symbols in the metal floor of the medical bay. Alex stared at the symbols in amazement. They were not random scratches, but precise diagrams, showing the structure of atoms and the way they combined during fusion reactions. Ember was not just listening to his explanations. The hatchling was correcting them, showing Alex more efficient ways to organize the fusion process. It was then that Alex truly understood what he had found. This was not just any Draknari hatchling. This creature carried within its young mind the accumulated knowledge of one of the most advanced civilizations in galactic history. The Draknari had not just disappeared, they had hidden, waiting for the right time to return. The third week of the journey brought new challenges. Ember was growing rapidly, already twice the size it had been when Alex found it. The creature's appetite was enormous, and it seemed to prefer eating metals rather than organic food. Alex fed it spare parts from his toolkit and watched in fascination, as Ember's digestive system somehow broke down complex alloys and used them to strengthen its own scales. More importantly, Ember was beginning to fly. The medical bay was too small for real flight, but the hatchling could hover for short periods, its wings generating enough heat to make the already scorching air even hotter. Alex had to upgrade his cooling system twice just to prevent his environmental suit from overheating. During these flight attempts, Ember began to sing. The sounds were unlike anything Alex had ever heard, harmonious frequencies that seemed to resonate with the ship's metal hull. At first, Alex thought it was just random noise, but gradually he began to notice patterns. The songs changed depending on what Ember was doing. There was one melody for eating, another for sleeping, and a particularly complex series of notes when the hatchling was examining the heating equipment Alex had built. On the last day of the journey, as Earth's sun appeared on the navigation screens, Alex made a discovery that changed everything. He was doing routine maintenance on the heating system when he noticed that some of the metal components had been modified. The changes were subtle but significant, improving the efficiency of heat distribution by almost 30%. Alex had not made those modifications. Ember had done it, somehow reshaping the metal with a combination of heat and pressure that Alex could not even begin to understand. The hatchling was not just learning from the equipment around it. It was improving it, applying knowledge that had been passed down through generations of Draknari engineers. As they approached Earth's orbital traffic control, Alex filled out the paperwork for a very unusual customs declaration. Under cargo, he wrote, "One live Draknari hatchling, requiring extreme heat for survival." Under destination, he wrote, "Mount Erebus Research Station, Antarctica." The customs official who processed his request was probably going to think it was a joke. After all, everyone knew the Draknari were extinct. But Alex had learned something important during his 3 weeks in hyperspace. Extinction was just another engineering problem, and the right combination of determination and creativity could solve almost anything. Ember pressed its face against the small porthole in the medical bay, staring at the blue and white planet growing larger on the view screen. The hatchling made soft, curious sounds as it watched clouds swirl across Earth's surface. For the first time in centuries, a Draknari was coming home to the one world where beings were crazy enough to live next to active volcanoes. Alex smiled as he began his approach to Earth's atmosphere. The real adventure was about to begin. The transport helicopter shuddered as it flew through the Antarctic winds toward Mount Erebus. Alex held the specially designed heat container carefully in his lap, feeling Ember's movement inside as the hatchling reacted to the changing air pressure. Through the helicopter's windows, he could see the volcanic peak rising from the white landscape like a giant's chimney, smoke and steam pouring from its summit. Dr. Rachel Barnes sat across from him, her eyes bright with excitement behind her protective goggles. She was the head of the Mount Erebus Research Station, a woman who had spent 15 years studying how life could survive in the most extreme conditions on Earth. When Alex had contacted her with his unusual request, she had agreed to help immediately. "I still can't believe you found a living Draknari," she shouted over the helicopter's engine noise. "The scientific implications are staggering. We could learn more about their civilization from one living specimen than from all the archaeological digs in the galaxy." Alex nodded, but his attention was focused on the container's temperature readings. Even with the portable heating unit, running at maximum power, Ember's body temperature was dropping slowly but steadily. The hatchling needed to get into the volcanic environment soon, or all of Alex's efforts would be wasted. The helicopter touched down on a landing pad carved into the volcanic rock. Alex was amazed to see that the pad itself was warm enough to melt the snow that fell on it. Pipes carrying superheated steam ran underneath the platform, keeping it ice-free even in the Antarctic winter. Dr. Barnes led him through a series of airlocks into the research station. The building was built directly into the side of the volcano, with corridors that wound deeper and deeper into the mountain. The walls were lined with thick insulation, but Alex could still feel heat radiating from the volcanic rock beneath his feet. "We've prepared a special chamber for your friend," Dr. Barnes explained as they walked. "It's normally used for studying extremophile bacteria, organisms that can survive in temperatures that would kill most life forms. We've modified it to handle even higher heat levels." They passed laboratories where scientists in heat-resistant suits were studying samples of volcanic material. Through thick windows, Alex could see chambers filled with glowing lava and equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The entire facility was designed around the idea that some forms of life not only survived extreme heat, but actually needed it to thrive. The chamber they had prepared for Ember was unlike anything Alex had ever seen. It was a sphere of crystallized metal suspended above a direct flow of lava from the volcano's interior. The heat was so intense that Alex could feel it through the thick observation windows, even though he was standing in an air-conditioned corridor. The temperature inside ranges from 1,500 to 2,000 degrees Celsius, Dr. Barnes explained. "We can adjust it higher if needed. The atmosphere is kept at the right pressure and composition for Draknari physiology, based on the historical records we have." Alex watched as technicians in full environmental suits made final adjustments to the chamber's systems. Everything had been designed with Ember's needs in mind, from the feeding systems that could deliver molten metals to the monitoring equipment that could track the hatchling's health in such extreme conditions. "Are you ready?" Dr. Barnes asked. Alex nodded and carefully opened the heat container. Ember looked up at him with those large golden eyes, making soft questioning sounds. The hatchling had grown noticeably during the journey to Earth, and its scales were brighter red than they had been when Alex first found it. "This is it, little one," Alex whispered. "Your new home." The transfer was done quickly but carefully. Ember was placed in a smaller transport container designed specifically for the extreme heat environment. Alex watched through multiple layers of protective shielding as the container was moved into the main chamber and opened. For a moment, nothing happened. Ember remained curled up in the transport container, as if unsure about its new surroundings. Then slowly, cautiously, the hatchling stepped out into the superheated chamber. The change was immediate and dramatic. Ember's scales began to glow, with their own internal light, shifting from red to gold to brilliant orange. The hatchling spread its wings for the first time since Alex had found it, and they caught the light from the flowing lava like stained glass windows. Ember threw back its head and made a sound unlike anything it had produced before. It was part roar, part song, and completely filled with joy. The hatchling began to move around the chamber with energy and grace that Alex had never seen, occasionally breathing small puffs of flame that danced in the superheated air. "Look at the biometric readings," Dr. Barnes said in amazement. "Its metabolism is increasing by the minute. Heart rate is stabilizing. Brain activity is off the charts. This is exactly what it needed." Alex pressed his hand against the observation window and was surprised to see Ember notice the gesture. The hatchling flew over to the window and placed one small clawed hand against the barrier from the other side, as close as it could get to matching Alex's hand position. "Thank you," Ember said clearly. Alex jerked back in surprise. Those were the first words the hatchling had spoken in any language he could understand. Dr. Barnes grabbed his arm excitedly. "It spoke. Did you hear that? It actually spoke in standard Galactic." Ember tilted its head and studied them both through the window. "Alex," it said, pointing one claw at him. Then it looked at Dr. Barnes. "Helper. It knows your name," Dr. Barnes whispered. "It's been listening and learning this whole time." Over the following hours, Alex and Dr. Barnes watched in fascination as Ember explored its new environment. The hatchling seemed to instinctively understand the chamber's systems, touching various controls and sensors with its claws, and somehow understanding their function. Temperature good, Ember announced after examining the heat regulation systems. Air good, food. The hatchling looked hopefully at the feeding system Alex had explained to it. Dr. Barnes activated the feeding mechanism, and molten copper flowed into a specially designed bowl. Ember approached it eagerly and began to eat, its digestive system somehow processing the liquid metal as easily as another creature might eat fruit. As the day progressed, Ember's vocabulary expanded rapidly. The hatchling asked questions about the equipment, about Earth, about humans and their technology. Its intelligence was clearly far beyond what Alex had expected, even knowing the reputation of the Draknari. How many humans live near fire mountains? Ember asked during one of their conversations. Millions, Alex replied. We build cities near volcanoes on earthquake fault lines in the paths of hurricanes. Most other species think we're crazy. Ember made a sound that Alex was learning to recognize as laughter. Not crazy. Practical. Fire brings power. Movement brings change. Danger brings strength. Dr. Barnes was frantically taking notes on everything Ember said. The philosophical implications are incredible, she muttered. It's describing the core principles of Draknari civilization. As evening approached, Ember settled down in the center of the chamber, curled up near the flowing lava. The hatchling's scales had grown even brighter throughout the day, and its wings now generated enough heat to create visible distortion in the air around them. Will you visit tomorrow? Ember asked as Alex prepared to leave for his quarters. Every day, Alex promised, until you're big enough to take care of yourself. Good, Ember said sleepily. Much to learn, much to teach. Dragons remember everything. As Alex walked back through the facility's corridors, he could hear Ember beginning to sing softly in its chamber. The song was complex and beautiful, with harmonies that seemed to resonate through the volcanic rock itself. Dr. Barnes mentioned that the monitoring equipment was picking up similar frequency patterns from deep within the volcano, as if the mountain itself was responding to the young dragon's voice. For the first time in centuries, a Draknari was home. 6 months had passed since Ember first entered the volcanic chamber, and the changes were remarkable. The hatchling had grown from the size of a house cat to roughly the size of a large wolf, its scales now a brilliant gold red that seemed to contain its own inner fire. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the mental development that amazed everyone at the research station. Alex arrived for his weekly visit to find Ember working on something that made him stop and stare, in disbelief. The young dragon had somehow acquired several pieces of broken equipment from the station's salvage pile and was methodically taking them apart with its claws. But this was not random destruction. Ember was examining each component carefully, sorting them into precise patterns across the chamber floor. Good morning, Alex, Ember said without looking up from its work. The dragon's voice had deepened over the months, taking on the rich harmonics that were characteristic of adult Draknari. Speech. I am solving the problem with the thermal exchange system. Dr. Barnes joined Alex at the observation window, her tablet computer filled with notes and measurements. It started this yesterday, she explained in an excited whisper. The equipment it's working on came from the station's main heating system. We've been having efficiency problems for months, but our best engineers haven't been able to figure out what's wrong. Alex watched as Ember carefully selected a crystal component and held it up to the light from the lava flow. The dragon's eyes could apparently see things that human instruments missed, because it made a disapproving sound and set the crystal aside in what was obviously a reject pile. This crystal has harmonic fractures, Ember announced. The frequency resonance is wrong. It creates thermal feedback loops that waste energy. Dr. Barnes frantically made notes. How can you tell just by looking at it? Ember paused in its sorting and looked at her with patience that seemed oddly mature for such a young creature. Dragon eyes see heat patterns. Heat patterns show stress in crystal matrix. Stress patterns show where fractures will develop. Simple. Simple, Alex muttered under his breath. Right, Over the following weeks, Ember's diagnostic abilities continued to amaze the research team. The dragon could identify problems in equipment that human sensors could not detect. More importantly, Ember seemed to understand the underlying principles behind human technology better than the humans who had built it. "Your fusion reactors are inefficient," Ember explained during one of their daily conversations. "You contain the plasma with magnetic fields, but you do not listen to the plasma's song. Each reaction has its own frequency. If you match the containment field to the frequency, you can increase efficiency by 40%. Dr. Barnes had stopped being surprised by such statements. Instead, she had begun organizing teams of engineers to test Ember's suggestions. So far, every single one had worked exactly as the dragon predicted. The breakthrough came when Ember began to sing while working. The dragon's songs had grown more complex over the months, evolving from simple melodies into intricate compositions that seemed to have mathematical structure. Alex had started recording the songs, partly because they were beautiful and partly because he suspected they contained important information. It was Alex who made the connection. He was listening to one of Ember's work songs while reviewing technical specifications for a new heating system when he noticed the pattern. The frequency modulations in the song matched perfectly with the resonance specifications for the crystal components. "Ember," he said during his next visit, "are you singing the equipment manuals?" The dragon looked up from its work with what Alex had learned to recognize as a pleased expression. "Not manuals, songs." Dragon ancestors sang their knowledge into the crystals and metals they worked with. Knowledge becomes part of the material. Materials remember the songs. This revelation led to even more amazing discoveries. Ember could make dead alien technology work simply by singing to it. The dragon's voice could activate systems that human scientists had been studying unsuccessfully for decades. But more than that, Ember could improve the technology, teaching it new songs that made it work better than its original designers had intended. "Watch," Ember said during one demonstration. The dragon had been given a piece of Draknari crystal technology that had been dormant for centuries. It was a beautiful artifact, but as far as human scientists could determine, it was just an elaborate decoration. Ember began to sing, a low harmonic melody that made the crystal begin to glow with soft inner light. As the song continued, the glow spread through intricate patterns carved into the crystal's surface. Finally, the entire artifact lifted into the air and began to rotate slowly, projecting complex holographic displays that showed star maps and mathematical equations. "Navigation computer," Ember explained casually. "Very old design, but still functional. It remembers the songs." Alex found himself spending more and more time at the research station. Ember seemed to enjoy his company, often asking questions about human culture and technology. The dragon was particularly interested in human history, especially the stories of how humans had learned to survive in dangerous environments. "Your species is very young," Ember observed during one of their conversations. "But you learn quickly. Most species avoid danger. Humans embrace it and make it useful. This is why the ancient dragons respected humans." "Ancient dragons?" Alex asked. "You mean there were others?" Ember's expression grew thoughtful. "Dragons do not die as other species understand death. We sing our knowledge into crystals and metals. When our bodies fail, our songs remain. I carry the songs of many ancestors. They teach me through dreams and memories." This explained so much about Ember's advanced knowledge. The dragon was not just learning on its own. It was accessing a vast library of information, passed down through generations of Draknari. As winter approached in Antarctica, Ember underwent another growth phase. The dragon was now large enough that its chamber had to be expanded twice. Its wings could generate temperatures hot enough to melt steel, and its voice could produce frequencies that resonated through the entire volcanic mountain. But perhaps the most significant change was in Ember's personality. The dragon had developed a sense of humor that often caught the research team off guard. It enjoyed playing pranks on new technicians, such as making equipment glow ominously when they were not looking or singing in frequencies that made their tools vibrate in amusing ways. "Humans are funny," Ember told Alex one day. You are afraid of so many things that cannot hurt you, but you are not afraid of things that should terrify you. You build homes next to exploding mountains and think, it is normal. Is that a compliment or an insult? Alex asked. Both, Ember replied with dragon laughter. It is why dragons and humans were friends in the old days. We understood each other's madness. During their last conversation of the month, Ember revealed something that changed everything Alex thought he knew about the situation. There are others, Alex, the dragon said quietly. Other hatchlings sleeping in the old places, waiting for the right conditions to wake up. Your species has the gift we need. You are willing to live in the dangerous places where dragon eggs can hatch. Alex felt his heart rate increase. How many others? Ember's golden eyes reflected the glow of the lava. Hundreds, maybe thousands, hidden on worlds where the fire still burns hot, waiting for someone brave enough or crazy enough to wake them up. The implications were staggering. Alex was not just helping one lost hatchling survive. He might be helping to resurrect an entire civilization. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. What do we need to do? He asked. Ember smiled, showing teeth that glowed like molten gold. First, we need more volcanoes. 2 years after Alex first found a dying hatchling in a salvage yard, Mount Erebus had become the most important research facility in human space. Ships from every major species in the galaxy arrived daily, bringing delegations of scientists, diplomats, and engineers who wanted to witness the impossible. The Dreknari, everyone's textbook said, were extinct. But Ember was very much alive and growing larger every day. Alex stood on the observation deck of the facility's new expansion, watching Ember work with a team of human engineers on something that defied every law of physics he had learned in school. The dragon, now the size of a small shuttlecraft, was singing to a collection of metal and crystal components. Under the influence of those harmonic frequencies, the materials were reshaping themselves into a structure that seemed to be part spacecraft and part living creature. The first resurrection ship, Dr. Barnes said as she joined Alex at the viewing window. Ember calls it a song vessel. It's designed to seek out dormant Dreknari eggs and provide the specific conditions needed for hatching. Alex nodded, but his attention was focused on the dozens of other projects happening throughout the expanded facility. Teams of humans and the 3 other young dragons that had been successfully awakened over the past year were collaborating on technologies that made fusion power look primitive by comparison. They had learned to grow crystals that could store information in harmonic frequencies, to create metals that responded to thought and emotion, and to build machines that seemed more alive than artificial. The breakthrough had come 8 months earlier when Ember led them to a hidden chamber deep within Mount Erebus itself. The chamber had been carved by volcanic activity millions of years ago, but inside they had found something that changed everything. Dozens of crystalline eggs, each one containing a dormant Dreknari hatchling, had been hidden in the chamber's superheated environment. The ancestors were clever, Ember had explained as they examined the discovery. They knew their bodies were failing, but they also knew that someday others would come who were crazy enough to live next to active volcanoes. They prepared for the future. Not all of the eggs had been viable after so many centuries, but 7 had successfully hatched. The young dragons that emerged were all different, each carrying the memories and skills of different branches of ancient Dreknari civilization. There was Storm, whose songs could control weather patterns. Crystal, who could grow living gems that stored vast amounts of information. And Forge, whose breath could transform raw materials into complex machinery. The galactic community had reacted to the news with a mixture of awe and fear. The Dreknari had been the most advanced civilization in known history before their disappearance. Their return could shift the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Emergency sessions were called in the Galactic Council. Trade agreements were hastily rewritten. Several species had even sent military fleets to Earth's outer system, though they maintained they were just conducting training exercises. But the dragons themselves seemed remarkably unconcerned with politics. They were focused on their work, on rebuilding their knowledge base, and on finding more of their hidden eggs. They treated the human scientists as partners rather than servants, sharing their knowledge freely and learning human techniques with enthusiasm. We do not seek to rule, Ember had told the First Galactic Council delegation. We seek to grow, to learn, to create. The universe is large enough for all species to thrive, but some knowledge was too dangerous to leave unguarded. We hid until, we could find partners wise enough to help us use it responsibly. The partnership between humans and dragons had produced results that amazed everyone involved. Human ingenuity combined with Dragnari knowledge was solving problems that had puzzled scientists for centuries. They had developed new forms of faster-than-light travel that used harmonic frequencies instead of hyperspace engines. They had created materials that could repair themselves and grow stronger under stress. They had even begun to understand the fundamental forces that held the universe together. Alex walked through the facility's newest section, where young human engineers worked alongside dragon hatchlings on projects that would have been pure fantasy just a few years earlier. The partnership worked because both species shared a common trait that other civilizations found disturbing. They were willing to take risks that seemed insane to more cautious beings. In one laboratory, he found Ember working with a team of human physicists on what they called a probability engine. The device could apparently calculate the likelihood of various future events and adjust reality slightly to encourage beneficial outcomes. Alex did not pretend to understand how it worked, but the test results were undeniably impressive. "Hello, Alex," Ember said, without looking up from the delicate crystal matrix it was growing with its breath. The dragon's voice now carried harmonics that could be felt as much as heard, creating a sense of warmth and comfort in everyone nearby. "We are almost ready for the first expedition." Alex had been dreading this moment for months. The dragons had located several worlds where their ancestors had hidden egg chambers, but these worlds were not as conveniently close as Mount Erebus. Some were in the centers of active war zones. Others were on planets with environmental conditions that would kill most species within minutes. All of them would require expeditions into places that other civilizations had declared too dangerous for exploration. "The Council has approved the mission," Alex said. "But they want human crews for all the ships." Ember made a sound that might have been amusement. "Of course they do. Other species are too sensible to volunteer for suicide missions to lava worlds and radiation storms. But humans think such places sound exciting." Alex had to admit the dragon had a point. When the mission details had been announced, human volunteers had signed up faster than the recruitment offices could process applications. The chance to explore forbidden worlds and potentially discover more dragon eggs appealed to the same instincts that had driven humans to climb mountains, dive into ocean trenches, and build cities in earthquake zones. "Will you be coming with us?" Alex asked. "We all will," Ember replied. "The song vessels are designed for dragon-human crews. We need each other's strengths for this to work. You provide the courage to attempt impossible things. We provide the knowledge to survive them." Over the following weeks, Alex watched the final preparations for humanity's most ambitious exploration mission. 12 song vessels had been constructed, each one a masterpiece of combined human and dragon engineering. They could travel faster than any ship previously built, survive conditions that would destroy conventional spacecraft, and most importantly, they could sing the ancient wake-up songs that might coax dormant dragon eggs back to life. The night before departure, Alex stood once again on the observation deck overlooking Mount Erebus. The volcano had become much more than a research facility. It was now the capital of a new alliance between two species that understood each other's particular brand of madness. "Nervous?" Dr. Barnes asked as she joined him. "Terrified," Alex admitted. "We're about to attempt something that could either save a civilization or get us all killed in spectacular ways." "Sounds like a typical human project," she replied, with a smile. "Remember when you first brought Ember here? You were just a salvage mechanic who found a dying creature and decided to help it. Look what that single act of kindness has led to." Alex thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. It had started with a simple decision to help a creature in need. Now they were preparing to search the galaxy for the remnants of an ancient civilization, using ships that sang and technologies that seemed more like magic than science. The launch ceremony was attended by representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Some came to show support, others came to keep an eye on what they saw as a potentially dangerous development, but all of them recognized that they were witnessing the beginning of a new age. As Alex boarded his assigned song vessel, he found Ember waiting for him in the specially designed chamber that served as both the ship's engine room and the dragon's living space. The walls were lined with crystals that glowed with their own inner light, and the air was warm enough to make Alex grateful for his environmental suit. "Ready for another adventure?" Ember asked. Alex looked around the incredible ship that had been grown rather than built, powered by songs rather than fuel, and designed to survive conditions that would terrify any reasonable being. Through the viewports, he could see 11 other song vessels preparing for departure, each carrying a mixed crew of humans and dragons on a mission that would take them to the most dangerous places in the galaxy. "Ready," he said. As the ships launched from Mount Erebus and began their journey into the unknown, Alex reflected on how much had changed since he first heard a weak, crying sound in a crashed ship's cargo hold. He had been a simple salvage mechanic, looking for scrap metal to sell. Now he was part of an expedition that might reshape galactic civilization. But in some ways, nothing had changed at all. He was still helping creatures in need, still taking risks that more sensible people would avoid, and still discovering that the impossible was just another word for something that nobody had been crazy enough to try yet. The song vessels sang as they entered hyperspace, their harmonies creating ripples in spacetime that carried them toward distant worlds where ancient secrets waited to be awakened. Behind them, Mount Erebus continued to glow against the Antarctic sky, a beacon of hope for species throughout the galaxy who had learned that sometimes the most dangerous places were also the most precious. Alex smiled as he felt the ship's song resonate through his bones. The universe was about to become a much more interesting place. The legacy of a single act of compassion was spreading across the stars, carried by beings who understood that the best way to survive impossible odds was to face them together. Dragons and humans, fire and determination, ancient wisdom and reckless courage. It was a combination that other species might never understand, but it was exactly what the galaxy needed. The age of dragons had returned, and this time, they were not alone.